You hear about it in the news all the time: government spending, tax cuts, stimulus packages. But how does all that actually affect the economy? Well, today we're opening up the government's economic toolkit to break down fiscal policy. And let's just dive right into the big question, the one everyone argues about. When the government spends billions of dollars, does it genuinely create new jobs, or is it just kind of shuffling them around from one place to another? To even begin to answer that, we have to get a handle on the main tool the government has to work with. So at its core, fiscal policy is just how the government uses its budget, so its spending and its power to tax, to try and steer the economy. You can think of it like driving a car. Sometimes you need to hit the gas to speed things up, other times you need to tap the brake to slow down, all to keep the ride as smooth as possible. And this happens in two main ways. Some of it is basically on autopilot. Those are what we call automatic stabilizers. A great example is employment insurance. When a recession hits and people lose their jobs, the system automatically starts paying out more money. But then there are times when the government intentionally grabs the steering wheel. That's discretionary policy, when they actively pass a new law to cut taxes or launch some big new spending program. All right, so to really understand how these tools get used, we need to get a sense of the scale here. I mean, where does all this government money actually come from, and where in the world does it go? So if you look at the federal level, the single biggest slice of that pie is money transferred directly to households. We're talking a full third of the entire budget going to things like childcare benefits and social assistance. And where's the cash coming from? Well, the answer is pretty simple. It's coming from us. Almost half, 48%, of all federal revenue comes from personal income taxes. That makes it, by far, the government's biggest source of money. But the story looks a little different when you zoom in on the provincial level. Here, the budget is totally dominated by two massive areas: healthcare and education. And get this, a massive 38% of all provincial spending goes to healthcare, just healthcare alone. This really highlights a huge challenge the provinces are facing, because as our population gets older, you can bet that number is only going to climb. Okay, so we've established the government has these big levers it can pull: spending and taxes. But how do they actually use them to manage all the ups and downs the economy throws at us? It pretty much boils down to two opposite moves. When the economy is struggling, like in a recession, the government uses expansionary policy. That's the gas pedal, to try and speed things up. But when things are overheating and prices are rising too fast, it uses contractionary policy, the brake, to cool things down a bit. So, during a recession, the government hits the gas. They either spend more money or they cut taxes. And the goal is to boost what economists call aggregate demand, which is really just a fancy term for the total demand for everything in the economy. More spending means more demand, and that gets the whole economic engine turning over faster. Now flip that around. If the economy is running too hot and you've got high inflation, the government gently taps the brakes. By cutting its own spending or raising taxes, it's actually pulling money out of the economy. That reduces overall demand and helps get those rising prices under control. But here's where things get really powerful. When the government makes one of these moves, it's not just a one-time push. It actually creates a ripple that can spread through the entire economy. This is something called the multiplier effect. And the core idea here is that an initial burst of government spending doesn't just get spent once and then disappear. Oh no, it gets spent over and over and over again, which amplifies the original impact. Just picture it like this. The government spends, say, $10 billion to hire a company to build a new bridge. That company then uses that money to pay its engineers and its construction workers. Now, what do those workers do? They take their paychecks and they go spend that new income at grocery stores, restaurants, maybe on a new car. And suddenly, those business owners have more income. And you see where this is going, right? The cycle just keeps on rolling. And here, you can see the results of that ripple. In this example, an initial $10 billion from the government can end up creating $20 billion in total economic activity. That first push is literally multiplied as it moves from person to person through the economy. So if this tool is so powerful, you're probably asking yourself, well, why don't governments just use it to make the economy perfect all the time? And as with most things in economics, it's just not that simple. There are complications. The two biggest roadblocks are timing and this other thing called crowding out. I mean, seriously, it can take months, sometimes years, for politicians to even recognize there's a problem, then pass a law, and then actually get a project started. By the time that all happens, the economy might have completely changed. But let's really focus in on this idea of crowding out, because it's probably the most important argument against too much government intervention. It's this idea that when the government steps in a big way, the private sector might actually step back. Okay, so it starts with borrowing. To fund a big spending program, the government often has to borrow huge amounts of money. That creates a lot more competition for loans, and it can push up interest rates for absolutely everyone in the economy. So when interest rates creep up, it suddenly becomes more expensive for a private business to get a loan to build that new factory, or for a family to get a mortgage to buy a new house. So this drop in private spending can cancel out or crowd out the initial boost from all that government spending. And that brings us right back to our original question. Fiscal policy, without a doubt, has the power to juice the economy, especially with that multiplier effect. But in the real world, its effectiveness gets messy because of those time lags and the potential for crowding out private investment. So, does government spending create jobs? Well, the answer isn't a simple yes or a simple no. It's a constant, complicated trade-off between the power of government action and its potential to displace private activity. And really, understanding that trade-off, that's the key to understanding all of fiscal policy.